I want to welcome chocolate fans of all flavors, no matter where you might be today, for checking into this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. My special guest today is Jeff Abella of Moka Origins, and we're going to jump into that right after we get through the opening video. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon, and my special guest today is Jeff Abella, who is the founder of Moka Origins in Pennsylvania. I believe it's in Pennsylvania. Isn't that right, Jeff?
That's right.
Great, and welcome. How are you today? And I'm glad to have you here.
Thanks, Clay. It's honor to be here, and yeah, just love the program you put together, and I follow along, and so being with you on it is an honor.
Well, I'm glad to have you here today. I do want to mention to everybody who is watching live, no matter where you are, that whether you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, what you can do is you can go into the chat or the comment section of the video where you're watching it today, and you'll be able to ask questions of Jeff or me or make comments live during today's live stream. And so I look forward to hearing from members of the audience while you're watching today. You're participants here. You're not just watchers. I want to make that very, very clear that it's important to me that I have this interaction with everybody who might be watching live, and then comments afterwards. So, Jeff, one of the things that I always like to do when I have people on is to talk about, what was the moment that got them into chocolate or into cocoa. And my understanding is that, cocoa and chocolate and coffee, actually, because that's where the Moka comes from, is not your first career. So what were you doing before you got into the world of coffee and chocolate?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I appreciate it. It's kind of a love story that starts in Cameroon, where my wife and I had been working for really the good part of a decade before chocolate kind of entered the scene and coffee. But we were working for a not-for-profit organization, and our backgrounds are in community development work, really focusing with communities on educational needs, health centers, libraries, as well as vocational training programs. And so, for instance, we're running a school of carpentry and construction. We have 4 health centers that we help oversee and operate, and then a network of public libraries. And so what does any of that have to do with chocolate? Well, we're in this beautiful region in Cameroon in the northwest part of the country that is known for growing extraordinary Arabica coffee. And very close to that area is where you can find a lot of cocoa growing. And so while just spending a decade pretty much living and working in this area, this region, we called it home and continue to kind of build a friend and family base there. We got very familiar with cocoa and coffee, not necessarily from the product standpoint, but from the agricultural standpoint and the relevance that those two crops have in these communities that we were working in. In fact, our main public library there was part of an old coffee co-op that we rented. It was a kind of a defunct operation, beautiful infrastructure. So we rented this. And this is almost 20 years ago now, but we restored that building. And so right in our backyard is a hulling machine and drying beds and all of this.
Mhm.
And so it started just opening up a lot of questions to us about, how could coffee and chocolate, that are two foods the world consumes billions of every day,
Mhm.
oftentimes don't afford to feed the families that grow those crops, at least in this part of Cameroon. And
Mhm.
so it was just a little glimpse into starting to understand the supply chain, understand the agricultural aspects, the
Mhm.
challenges that farmers face, and understand the supply chain a bit more.
So
And
if I can, because one of the questions I do like to ask people, I mean, when people ask me how I got into chocolate, right?
yeah,
My background is that I have an undergraduate fine arts degree, right? I trained as a photographer at Rhode Island School of Design, and immediately after I got out of school, I started working in the high tech industry. So I worked for my first startup in computer graphics, in 1983 is when I joined my first one. So were your university studies in international development? Was this something that you got from your parents, or is it something, I don't know if you're married by this time as you move, and why Cameroon? I mean,
right. All great questions. So no,
yeah,
my background is actually in audio engineering, and I worked for a advertising or
of
a
course,
recording studio for about 6 years.
yeah,
So yeah, nothing related. And during that period of 6 years, worked for a more of a corporate audio environment. So commercials, documentaries, marketing, and ultimately working with advertising agencies. And that kind of segued into helping a not-for-profit create frameworks for small business management that then it would later apply to these environments in Cameroon. So that
okay,
connection.
all right.
Yeah.
So you started working for a nonprofit that was already doing work in Cameroon.
They were already doing humanitarian work in
Okay.
India primarily,
Okay.
and were just about to launch its work in Cameroon, and they were looking for a startup team to help come in. Yeah, and so that was.
And you said, I'm all in. Let's go.
I had nothing. I was early 20s.
Okay.
Wasn't yet married.
Mhm.
My wife and I, my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time and I were in Madison, Wisconsin. We said yes to this opportunity, so we kind of liquidated what little belongings we had and moved to the Poconos, which was our base here in Pennsylvania, and then started spending about half of our time in Cameroon doing this educational and library and health center work.
So you're working with a community in the northwestern part of the country,
Mhm.
and again, the focus is in community development. So you're working among the people. You're helping them with a variety of projects. I'm guessing not just the library component, but it's
Correct.
all about um, community well-being and making. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's about
you're
community development in a
yeah.
very holistic point of view. So
Okay.
health, education,
Mhm.
vocational training, and women's empowerment are kind of the four prongs.
Mhm.
And that the health aspect is really unique. It's unique for West Africa in general, but we have a kind of a cool model there called farm to pharmacy, where we're actually growing medicinal herbs. We
Mhm.
have a manufacturing facility where that's processed into dietary supplements and herbal remedies, and then a pretty large team of about 200 public health workers that either do public health education or kind of disease prevention and utilize
Mhm.
this science of medicinal
Yeah. Right.
plant medicine. Yeah,
Great. And that's the NGO you're working with,
that's
right?
right. Yep.
Okay. So what
Yep.
I'd like to do for people who might be interested in taking a look at that work and perhaps supporting the work, Jeff, what you'll do is you'll send me a link, and what I'll do is I'll put it in the post for
Love it.
today's room, so that if you were all interested in learning more about what Jeff was doing before he got into cocoa and chocolate, or coffee and chocolate. So you're in this community, and the community has deep ties or historical ties into coffee.
Mhm.
Were they doing coffee at the time, or
Oh,
is it
they
around just
definitely
generally?
are.
Okay.
Absolutely. It just wasn't the peak of the coffee in that community. But in the 70s and 80s, when this infrastructure was built and it was thriving,
Mhm.
it was one of their largest commercial exports,
Mhm.
and the quality was still phenomenal. There just
Mhm.
hasn't been much development resources put into helping sustain that quality, in
Mhm.
both for coffee and cocoa.
Yeah, I mean, that is a problem. I mean, it is. I think one of the challenges associated with international development is that as long as the money is flowing in, it seems to be that there is progress. And one of the challenges is how do you create something which is self-sustaining, so that after you leave, right? And I'm, the you being the aid organization, and aid is the wrong word, and I think that might be part of the problem. We're using the wrong word, to be able to maintain after you leave. And a lot of that, I think, not only has to do with the infrastructure that gets put in place on the ground, but it's maintaining international contacts. I mean, if you're making a product for export, maintaining your presence, to people who are going to want to buy your car, it's a challenge.
It's a huge challenge. It's actually why I stuck around with this not-for-profit, was because it's a very participatory approach. At this point, I'm the only foreigner on the board, but from like project needs assessment, conceptualization, project planning, and execution, it's all local run. It could disappear, and now there's enough sustainability and drive from the local community that it's getting done right, and it's locally owned and operated, which I feel really good about.
Really, really important. So tell me what's going on here.
Yeah,
where are you? And it's a baby tree.
This is a little seedling. Yeah. So this is us planting, I think, our first round of cocoa at Moka Farm. This was in 2015. So crop trials. Once we decided to move in the direction of a more sustainable approach to development and use cocoa and coffee as the context for that, we started our first round of planting on our farm. And so that's a cocoa seedling.
So is this farm in Cameroon?
It is, yeah.
It's in Cameroon. And so what I've just done here quickly is I've switched over to the Moka Origins website. So again, a link to this website is in the post for today's room. You can scroll down, you can learn a lot more about what's going on, including, the way you think about your supply chain and sourcing, and including not just products, but, some of the things that you do. So planting trees, creating jobs, sourcing ethically. And, the real question, not for me, for me is, these seem to be approaches to what is you're doing that are very, very much built on the 10 years of experience that you got working with this NGO in this area. I mean, you've seen what works. Perhaps you've also seen what doesn't work, right? And you're looking to create something which is going to be sustainable. And when I think about chocolate makers, right, who say, I want to help farmers, I think that one of the challenges is, and I hope that we get to this over the course of the hour, is you have this notion that what you want to do is you want to help farmers. Laudable goal. We should all be doing this, right? But you need to balance that with, you need to be a sustainable business first and foremost, because if you're looking at decades-long commitments or generational commitments, if first and foremost you don't have a sustainable business, right, all bets are off. And you mentioned something earlier about doing business development that's associated with this NGO you're working with, and how does that inform your approach and all the things that you're working on here?
Hugely. So on the NGO side, it might be making sure that our health centers have a local revenue component so that there's enough cash flow to sustain the operations. On the Moka side, it was very clear that we wanted we wanted to use chocolate and coffee as a way to sorry about that.
I'm fully expecting 2 or 3 dogs or something like. We're gonna have a cat that's gonna photobomb in the background.
I have a 4-year-old who is usually running around the chocolate factory at this moment, so we'll see.
It's okay.
The whole financial sustainability part is really important. You have to balance your social interests, or for us, it's that, we're a business, right? So we have a financial performance that we have to hit to sustain and exist. But we also have another set of KPIs, which is what we call like our social impact metrics, to kind of make sure that what we're doing with our business is in line with our heart's intention, if that doesn't sound too fluffy, but with our social impact intention. And we don't want to do one and not the other, but at the same time, you have to have your business fundamentals need to be sound to even exist, and therefore grow. And therefore, when you grow, you can grow your social impact, but you can't really do one without the other. Or you certainly can't do social impact development work without a healthy business to support it. So yeah, it's a tough balance, and we've had to kind of create our own every business is different. Every operating environment is dynamic and different in its own way. So we've had to create our own for Moka with our chocolate and coffee business, and how that relates to Moka Farm in Cameroon, and then our tree planting goals, as well as our sourcing relationships with farmers in other parts of the world as well. It all has to be factored in.
Right. So you have like one of the sweetest chocolate factories, pun intended. So for people who are not familiar with the way these things go, for every single one of these live streams, I put together a post on the Chocolate Life. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is I've been trying to encourage my guests to supply photos and creating a gallery of those photos on the post, as well as links to resources that are mentioned either before the stream or during the stream. So to provide some context, and I asked Jeff to supply some photos, and this is one of the photos that he supplied. So yeah, no, you've got what looks to be are you using the silos at all? I mean, you got a very, very sweet factory here.
Not yet. The silos need to have a function though. And so we've had a lot of customers suggest ideas, but no functional use of the silos yet. It's a pretty sweet space. So we're on the campus of about a 400-acre not-for-profit in the Poconos. It's got a full retreat center too, if you ever want to get away and spend some time in it's a yoga retreat center in the Poconos with a chocolate factory nestled right in the middle of it. And the campus had a dairy barn that was already beautifully restored and had some other businesses operating in it. But most of it was underutilized or vacant. So when we launched Moka in Cameroon in 2015, I needed a little like R&D kitchen back here in Pennsylvania. And I was using my shed at one point. I had the bay mowers and small chocolate grinders going. And then I scaled up to my kitchen. Of course, that almost like broke my marriage. My wife finally said, get out of the house with your equipment. And this beautiful dairy barn was available. So we rented that and have been restoring it ever since. We've been in commercial production since 2017, and we'll get 15,000 people in the space every year to utilize our tours and tastings and just see the process in front of them. So,
it looks like a beautiful space, and it sounds like an opportunity to organize a Chocolate Life retreat at some point, get involved in chocolate making and yoga and a whole lot more. Sounds like a whole lot of fun. So we've seen this photo. You said you started off in your kitchen or your shack with a Beemore roaster, which is where I think a lot of people start. This is a gas-fired, electric-fired roaster. I can see that you've got a data logger. You and I were talking about that you don't have PLC control over the roaster quite yet. Is this one roaster you're using for both coffee and for cocoa beans?
Yep.
And did you go from your little Beemore straight to this?
We went from the Beemore to a smaller version of this, which was still like, it felt like a huge jump. I remember we went through a 3 kg, so about 6.5, 7 pounds, depending on how we loaded it. And going from a 1 pound Beemore, which we were really doing like a half a pound in, or cocoa, I guess we were hitting a pound and a half, but it was a big jump and just a whole different approach to roasting. So then we went from that 7 pound roaster to this one. This is a 15 kg. So we'll charge about 30 pounds of coffee in it, and we'll do maybe 50 pounds of cocoa, depending on how confident we are in the moisture and other aspects of that cocoa. And what I love about it, and I love that coffee roasters are so functional for cocoa. And in fact, they give, for us, I haven't done much oven roasting outside of in Cameroon. We have a little demo roast, a little off the farm kind of test lab, and that's an oven. I just love the variable control that we get with a coffee roaster, so we can apply the same level of science ultimately to cocoa roasting.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of really deep dive questions in there, and maybe an opportunity would be come and talk to a couple of people who have different approaches to roasting, and we'll just do a deep dive on roasting, which I think would be really, really interesting. But you mentioned something I thought was very interesting, is that you went from the Beemore right into this smaller 3 kg roasters, and you said it's very different, right? And so and then you're in this larger roaster, and there are differences between working with coffee and cocoa. So, let's talk about, the process, if we can, for just a little while about, was it surprising to you that when we went to one drum roaster to another drum roaster that it was very different? And about, we've got this one roaster here, the differences between roasting cocoa and roasting coffee in this same roaster.
I mean, for us, it was, and not only surprising, it was expensive. The educational costs were pretty high. And I think that was from a lack of experience as well, though. So that's where my door is always open. If you're scaling up, I may or may not add value, but I'd be willing to offer our experience up to consider. For example, when we went from that 3 kg to the 15, different drum size. Recalibration of our thermocouples and all of our and heat application. You're putting a lot more mass of bean now into that space, so everything changed, and it was a lot of batches of cocoa and coffee before we could get it right and dial that in.
Well, I'm assuming that you'd had a couple of profiles that you nailed in the small machine, and so you said, okay, I'm going to be able to take this profile, and I'm just going to be able to scale up, use it pretty much the same way.
I thought it was going to cookie cutter,
right.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very, very true that if you have a much larger mass of beans, whether they're cocoa beans or coffee beans, and you put them into the roaster, what's going to happen? I think technically the term is quench. You're going to drop the temperature of the roaster by very different amounts. And then you have the ability of whatever the heating mechanism to be able to respond. What's the recovery time to get you back into the zone you want to be in order to be able to roast at the temperatures you want to be able to roast at.
Totally.
These are completely independent variables. There's no relationship between one and the other when you're doing this. But again, my guess is if you're going back and forth between cocoa and coffee in the same roaster, there are some potential for residual oils on the inside of the drum. And so there's some cleaning necessary or when going back and forth between the two. But, you mentioned less coffee. So, this is a 15 kilo roaster, you'd put less coffee in it than you would put cocoa beans in it. For people who might not be interested in dynamics, why can't you load this drum with the same amount, same weight of product when you're going from one to the other?
Yeah, exactly. And I love the idea of a deep dive just on roasting. But being a technical coffee roaster, I believe has truly helped to really refine our cocoa roast and ultimately our flavor development of our chocolate line. And enjoy using the coffee machine for both. As far as changeover, so coffee, we do after we roast coffee, we do a dry burn, and then we do a wipe down. Not much more than that. And I don't know. I mean, cocoa has a shell on it, the husk. As long as we're confident in that every bean has good protection and we're not roasting exposed nibs, which would just be a whole different set of problems, which we have had. I feel like there isn't a whole lot of flavor contamination, or at least nothing that I've had anyone or myself pick up on.
Gotcha. So I want to jump in. We have a question from somebody who's watching, Eric Case. I mean, I've known Eric, gosh, I want to say since 2002, 2003, something like that. Probably longer than either of us want to admit is possible in this part of the world. I know him from his work at Guitard and other kinds of places. What I want to do is, so Eric asks, what do you want to achieve with your roasting process? So as far as the cocoa is concerned, and how does this new roaster allow you to manipulate roast profiles to get to this flavor goal? If I can, Eric, I mean, there are a bunch of different approaches to roasting, but I think that everybody, what they say is they want to bring out whatever the true character of the bean is, whether it's coffee or whether it's cocoa. But I also think that there are chocolate makers who have house styles. I mean, so, there tends to be a roast in a particular kind of way, for example, across things. So does Moka Origins, have a quote unquote house style, or how do you go about deciding what is it that you want to achieve with the individual coffee origins that you work with, and then the individual cocoa origins that you're working with?
We
And
very
for example, I mean, cocoa and Uganda are pretty close to each other, and you're also doing Cameroon. I'm sorry, Cameroon and Ghana and Tanzania and Uganda are fairly geographically closely located to each other. They're in the cocoa belt. How are the differences in this how are the Tanzania? Anyway, how are
yeah.
Okay, is there enough there for you to work with?
I'm following you 100%. We very specifically roast for origin, origin specific, and the flavor differences. You just pointed out 4 origins that are geographically in the same, well, on the same continent. They are dramatically different in flavor, meaning the beans are very different.
Are the genetics more or less the same? I mean, a lot of it, I don't know about for Tanzania, but when we talk about, Cameroon and Ghana, we have, primarily this, Brazilian Melanato Forastero that came through, Sao Tome, Principe and places like that before it came onto the mainland. But
my understanding is yes. Yeah, they're generally the same. However, the beans are very different. Acidity level, flavor, depth of chocolate, everything is very unique. And so part of the fun is figuring out ultimately what flavor potential does that bean have, and then trial and error working with that bean now to get at the best version of that flavor. And once we do, which can take 6 months, I mean, it's not like a one size fits all, and some we know there's potential, but we're just not nailing it. And so we'll work roast after roast, looking at roast times, looking at heat and application over time of that heat, and airflow to really get at a flavor that then for that origin we say is what we're going for, and then consistently hitting that every time is our goal.
So I want to dial into something that people who are watching this may not understand, but it's one thing that I learned about when I was looking at coffee roasters, is that if I'm a technical coffee roaster, the ability to control the airflow through the machine is the roaster is a really important component. So for example, if I'm coming like with a wet process Sumatran, which has got a very sort of, I want to say almost muddy kind of flavor profile, there's very bottomy, very rich. You're going to be looking at a very, very different set of notes than if you've got an Ethiopian, which has got drier, winier, higher notes. How I know that you can change the airflow in order to be able to emphasize, right, or mitigate to some extent those inherent characteristics of those beans. But specifically, what does airflow in a coffee roaster give you when it comes to this just additional parameter to play with when it comes to dialing in a flavor profile for a cocoa?
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing is moisture reduction. It allows us to really work with the moisture that's on that bean and help to remove it before we start grinding, and therefore makes conching a lot easier, or not less important, but we can achieve what we would need to in conching phase earlier on in the process, which is roasting. And from a flavor standpoint, I mean, the airflow really helps us to contain certain flavors or reduce and remove those flavors, remove those flavors from the bean mass. And
during roasting.
And then batch to batch, as a small batch maker, we might buy, let's say we buy 4 pallets. Let's say we buy 30 bags of 1 year's harvest from a partner, and that's a pretty small batch that we're making chocolate with, and it's consistent. And then next year, maybe something changed at the farm. Maybe it was the moisture, just the environmental conditions changed, or maybe it was something in the ferment or the drying that changed, or maybe something in the handling. But almost every year, or every lot of cocoa that comes in has slight different characteristics. And so we have found that the roasting step, especially airflow, allows us to we can use the airflow to get back to a point of consistency and flavor from batch to batch of cocoa. As the cocoa changes, we just have one more variable, which is airflow, to help us help us identify where we want to be and get to that point in the roast as far as the flavor.
I would say what you're looking for is what we've developed is the flavor that we're looking for. And what we can do is we can use the extra variable of airflow in order to be able to help us achieve a greater level of consistency. Right? From year to year to year, from harvest to harvest, and year to year to year. Eric, right, asks again, right? So when you're looking for bringing out the flavor of origin, is there any way that you can? I mean, talking about flavor in general is a really challenge. But if you can sort of explain what that means. So pick a Cameroonian bean, pick a Ghanaian bean. They're the two. What's in between them? Just Nigeria, or there may be a couple of others between them. But how would you characterize? So Ghana is known for this is the reference flavor just for chocolate. And how is Cameroon? Maybe Cameroon, the variety which we think of as Cameroon red. So how would you describe the flavor that you're looking for when you're roasting between those two?
Sounds good. So for example, the Ghanaian bean that we use doesn't have much fruit quality, or I'll say the acetic acid, the acid of that bean is low, and the fruit and ultimately the fruit quality of that or flavor profile is almost non-existent in that. It has a lot of more earthy tone, good chocolate, a little nutty. Now that depends on your roast, right? And the astringency is significantly higher than any of our other beans. I also noticed the fat content of the bean itself seems to be lower versus Cameroon. It's not a highly acidic bean, but the flavor of the chocolate has slightly more tannins. So I'm getting like cherry note, but more like brandied cherry, dried fruit, little raisin, none of which I'm getting in the Ghanaian bean. Another stark example is our Uganda and Tanzania, two countries that are very close together. But the Ugandan is very different than the Tanzania. The Tanzania is like tart cherry all the way, very high acetic acid content. When we load our grinders, like you need goggles on or your eyes are just watering. It's incredible. It's really beautiful. Uganda, very beautiful as well, but very different. The fruit is more like I would say a dried fruit, apricot even, just a little bit of a rounder chocolate flavor as well.
So you mentioned grinders. It looks like you're working in, these are like 35 kilo melangers or something like that. How many of them do you have, and how busy do you keep them?
They run around the clock. So, we're still kind of in our growth mode here. We're in our 5th year. Every year we're adding a grinder, a series of new toys. We're scaling up constantly. We're moving that bottleneck around, problem solving continuously. So on the grinding side, these are 100-pound grinders. We have 2 of those, and then we have a 200-pound as well. So we can have about 400 pounds of chocolate grinding. Just brought in another 200. Actually, it's a universal that we're installing now, so we're going to experiment with that. And they never stop. We have one dedicated to usually an origin, or we do a milk or like a white chocolate now, which is fun. So we just change them over maybe once every 2 weeks. We might stop them for a day to do some maintenance or cleaning, but they are just grinding around the clock. Yep.
Gotcha. So what I want to do is just quickly jump. We're about halfway through the hour. The time is just really speeding by. For those of you who are watching, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching afterwards, this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life today. So if you were to go, it may look a little bit different from what you've got. As I said, here is the post. So right here is the post for today's live stream. I maintain a calendar for all of the live streams that are here. And so you can see what's scheduled. Here's today's schedule, what I've got scheduled for the rest of the month. And here is also an archive of all of the live streams that we've done. If you'd prefer to go directly to YouTube and see all of the the history of all the live streams, you can see them here as well, trying to provide as much accessibility for what's going on. I also promote things on Instagram. So here's my Instagram feed. And we've also got the Moka Origins Instagram feed. These are all ways that you can find The Chocolate Life and learn more about what it is that we do. If you're a member, thank you very much for being a member. If you're not a member, you can click here and join. There are a bunch of different levels that you can support what it is that I do. One of which it has been since 2008 when I started The Chocolate Life, is free. I am unwavering in my commitment to making sure that if anybody who wants to join the community can join the community and support it. For every single one of the posts that are on the site, there is the ability down at the bottom to add comments. You have to be a member in order to add comments. But if you'd like to continue the conversation on The Chocolate Life or on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, please, we want you to I want you to be feel comfortable to go and do this. And I know that that there is historical value here. People are watching as we're doing this, but there's also going to be the option for jumping in later and watching them. I know that this is not the most convenient time for everybody around the world. So we're looking forward to having people watch these and, participate in the conversation after it gets done. So back again, Jeff, thanks for being here today. So I want to spend the last half of the hour, if we can, talking about sourcing, right? So I think there's this idealized notion of what direct trade is or could be. So we have this idea in our head of what we mean when we talk about direct trade, right? But you're sourcing in 4 countries. They're in the cocoa belt, more or less, of Africa. So Ghana, Cameroon, Tanzania, and Uganda. The regulatory environments and the legal environments are all these companies. Culturally, they're all very, very different as well. So can you walk us through quickly, the first origin is probably Cameroon that you sourced from, right? And, and then when you started working in other origins, how are they the same? How are they different? Surprises in terms of difficulties, challenges that you might have said, I've got this covered, I'm doing it already, and you find someplace else and it's like, it's like I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Yeah, it's very different. Cameroon's a good starting point, and then I'll end with some ideas or tips to consider. Every environment is very different, and it's hard to really know the landscape unless you've been there for a really long time, which is why it's so important to have partners there. And so for Cameroon, it was easier because we had been living there and working there. And so that's not an accessible scenario for everyone. But for there, direct trade really means, we are, first of all, we have Moka cocoa that we're growing ourselves. And then we have a farming community around us that we're starting to buy from. And so that, and this community comes from just having been there and being friends with this community. And then also being able to identify a partner or a mobilizer. It could be like a co-op, not working with any co-ops in Cameroon though, but organizers who are then facilitating collection points and mobilizing groups of farmers. And that's really been crucial for us and helped us scale. It was one thing to be able to buy a few bags of cocoa direct in Cameroon, and not make that a full-time job. But when we started needing full containers, for example, for our coffee, that's not something that we're able to kind of commit to. So having a really great local partner who can show us all of the farmers registered with them, the purchasing records, and ultimately the bean quality and showcase consistent quality, and reliability is a big part too. That's been really great for Cameroon. So we do direct purchasing or direct trade with Cameroon. And then there's other countries. So like Uganda is a great example, or Okay, or Dominican Republic, for example, kind of jump into Central America there. We work with Zerzal, and I'm mentioning them because I've been snacking on their bar, or our bar with their cacao. So we buy directly from the Zerzal cooperative, and that feels really good. It's nice and direct. They help us with the logistics, so they're doing all of the legwork on the ground, and they're really good at it. They're going to do it a lot more effectively, efficiently, and successfully than I ever could. But we're really close with there. We're spending time with them there every year and able to have their beans directly show up at our door. So having good partners is key. Like for Uganda, I was just there about 15 days ago. We love the beans that we're buying from Latitude Trade Company, and those beans those beans are being purchased very transparently, very directly by Latitude, and then we're working with Latitude to buy them, or working through a group like Uncommon Cocoa or another group, an importer, to source through. And these are all great things. I wish someone early on would have told me, hey, there's like 3 or 4 really great boutique importers that value transparency and sustainability, and you can link right with their mobilizers and meet all their farmers, but you don't need to be buying a container of beans yourself. And so,
well, again, what I think it says is that the ideal, right? I think when most people think of direct trade, right? I think that the idea is that they're going to the farm and they're buying from the farm. I mean, that's what direct means. And I think that, for me, the notion is how many intermediaries in the process are there. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that there are as few as possible, right? So that we get as close. But I also think there is a requirement that if I'm going to be what I call direct trade, is that what I actually have to do is I actually have to go to the places that I'm buying from. I need to go to the farm, see the people, right? And even if I'm not, paying them cash money for the beans right there and putting them on the back of a burro or in a canoe or the back of a truck, whatever it is that I need to do to get to the port, it talks about relationships, I think, more than anything else, and how we maintain those relationships. But going back to Cameroon, we had Nick Davis. I've had Nick Davis of 1-1 Cacao in Jamaica on as a guest a number of times, twice on Clubhouse, and he was here in the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that he does is he talks about the importance of having flexibility to when it comes to cooperative structures. So when you were talking about working with the community where you work with in Cameroon, the notion of how do you federate the farmers, right, in certain kinds of ways, so that they can support each other, right? Yeah. Because stuff happens in the world, and sometimes you need to be able to have people around you that you can rely on to help you. But also there is some ability in numbers for leverage when it comes to being a large enough, if as a group we can collectively produce a long container, right? And that gives us access to more customers than if I'm an individual farmer and I'm only doing 2 or 3 bags. So there's value, I think, in that kind of concept as well. But also are you doing centralized post-harvest, or are you trying to move towards that model? Is the nursery that you're doing for the Moka farm doing seedlings just for you, or are you making those resources available to other people that you're working with?
Yeah, so Moka Farm is really like a training hub and dispensary of seedlings, and we're just getting into our central purchasing for wet cocoa and fermentation and drying. And by just getting into it, I mean we're literally just starting, because our cocoa that we planted on our own farm in 2015, 2016, we're now starting to see production volumes that it makes sense to start experimenting, which is great because it also gives us a chance to now start purchasing wet cocoa and putting it with ours and having enough mass to be fermenting and drying. So that's the model. As far as our nursery goes, I would say we're currently we're to the point where only about 20% of the seedlings that we nurse are planted by Moka, and it's all our community network of farmers who are registered and eager for seedlings. So they're planting and replacing old trees and expanding their farms. Yeah, and so they come in for seedlings, and we have several agriculturalists that then they can link with on a weekly basis and kind of support them in the process. We learn a lot as well, and we're growing this nice little network of farmers in this place where no one else is investing in from a farmer resource standpoint. It's
just a quick technical question. In your seedlings, are you going them from seed or are you grafting everything?
Currently we're going by seed. Okay. Yeah. So we're just starting to get into a little bit of more grafting. Yeah. So more updates on that soon to come, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, just for people who may not know, there is the difference in terms of being able to predict what the seedling is going to grow from grafting, right? And what you can do is you can have a rootstock that might be a very, very hearty stock. Like in Ecuador, they often use CCN51 as the rootstock. And what they'll do is they'll graft onto that rootstock a more delicate flavor bean, so a Nacional, for example. And so they can take advantage of the characteristics of both of those. Also, if you have a mother tree, and what you can do is you can pull a bar from a mother tree and then graft it onto something, you know that the pods which are going to grow from that tree are going to have the characteristics of the mother tree rather than whatever the seed was pollinated by. So, just for those of you who may not be familiar with these nuances, that's why I asked the question.
It's a really great it's a really great approach, and it's something we have leveraged very extensively in our projects in South India. We were there with the Tibetan refugee settlements with the Dalai Lama for a 3-year partnership, doing a different crop altogether. But grafting was like so much more accessible as far as a science in that community and ready to go. So we're to that point now where we're going to start to experiment with that. Part of it was also like getting clear on what's growing well and what's not. So our mother garden is highly experimental, and we're just now learning, like, okay, 5 years in, like, talk about a long game of trial and error. It's kind of devastating and painful at times, but also the success when we do realize it is that much more meaningful because it's been so much invested effort. But anyway, we're just now, I think, educated enough internally to know what directions we would want to go in terms of our grafting.
Historically, what I'm doing is I'm trying to connect this to the experience that I had working with Ingeman in Nicaragua, which was built on top of a research effort, which went back 15 to 20 years before they even got involved. And Frank Homan of Shoko was in between, but there was a research effort to identify heirloom cacao varieties. These are what are called neo-criollos, also what are also called criollados, not necessarily pure criollo, but trinitario, so a hybrid of a criollo and a forastero, which almost everything in the world is, but one which had specific genetic characteristics that they were looking for in terms of robustness, but also flavor profile. And so they actually did this trip throughout most of the growing regions of Nicaragua, looking at specific trees and then doing DNA sequencing on them, and then picking particular trees. And these are identified as mother trees. And so, when you go to the nursery, everything is grafted from bars pulling from these trees, so they can be sure that the genetics of everything that they're supplying is exactly the same. So it's really, really important.
That's extensive, phenomenal.
And fortunately they had the resources in order to be able to continue the work. And now they're going from regular grafting to what's called in Spanish microinserción, so micro insertion grafting, which is where you graft from the top rather than from the side. We're getting into sort of geek levels of craziness, but it's something I've learned. So we have another question also from Eric. Eric, thanks for being here for the entire time so far. So he wants to know: are you supplying the seedlings free of charge to the farm, or are people buying them from there?
No, they're supplied free. Okay. So what we do is get pods either from our own farm now, finally, or from research institutions. We work with a few tropical agricultural specialists throughout Cameroon, and that was where
are these employed by the Cameroonian government, or would they be for like the French Tropical Agricultural Research Institute, CIRAD, or someplace like that?
Yeah, both actually. Yeah, so one is like more governmental, and then the other is yeah, more of an academic kind of private partner, like ERAD, and
Gotcha.
it's worked out well. And then we can kind of like, both of them have different approaches to, I would say, the agricultural science, and then ultimately the end goals for each, or the ultimate objectives, are very different from both of these, whether it's the government or the private research institutions. Anyway, so we kind of have learned what to expect from either, and it's been really nice. That was a great way to get started as far as learning what varieties are available, sub varieties, and then some best practices. So we'll have an agronomist come up. I think it's every 3 months, or maybe it's every 6 months now. It used to be every month as we were getting started, and spend time with us on the ground, really helping us with proper planning, plotting, soil composition, understanding the climate patterns and our irrigation needs. So we apply 3 different irrigation strategies. One is none at all, and the other is just kind of life-saving irrigation through key periods of the time using buckets. And then we also installed a really cool drip irrigation system. In fact, I think today is World Water Day. I could be wrong on that, but I'm going to take a moment to talk about water then. I think it's today.
It's always appropriate
It's always
to talk
important.
about irrigation and stuff like that. Yeah.
So we dug we have 2 different water systems. One is a river-fed pump system that pumps water from the river. It's an all-season river that borders the farm. And it's about 1,000 feet of piping throughout the farm. That water then feeds the Moka farm or the community farming plots that are there and available to the community if they want access to secured land that has water for dry season agriculture. And then we have a well that provides clean and safe drinking water to roadside taps for the community to access anytime. And then also it feeds a tank, which then is filtered, and we have drip irrigation throughout about 5 acres of our farm, just highly experimental. But what we're doing is measuring the output, the kind of the production potential of no irrigation, semi-irrigation, and more extensive irrigation. So,
and I look forward to, hearing what those experience. I think many people are. I mean, I've seen experiments in Ecuador and Peru for different examples of these things, but I don't know that I've been any place where there's been a conscious attempt to be able to model the 3 of these things in the same location in order to be able to understand the impact when it comes to productivity of the trees going forward. So, would love to, as you learn more and have you, as you learn more, would love to have you back on and to be able to talk about those things. Eric, thank you very much for that comment. Glad to hear that we answered your question. We're into the last 10 minutes or so, and there's a sort of sourcing question that I'd like to ask, because the government regulatory environment in Cameroon and Uganda and Tanzania is relatively hands-off compared with Ghana, right? So in Ghana, you have to work through a licensed buying company. I mean, this is something many people might not know, but if I am a cocoa farmer in Ghana and I want to also become a chocolate maker, right, I have to sell my beans to the government cocoa board and then buy them back. Right. And I believe unless they're organic, I mean, you may be able to work, with organic. But how different is it? I mean, are you working directly with a licensed buying company? Or are you working with some intermediary who works with a licensed buying company? And how close can they get to the farms? Right.
Yeah. I mean, Cameroon is highly regulated, like everywhere, but it's not. The structure is different than Ghana. We are not having to sell and then buy back from the government. But the buying of cocoa and coffee, and just those 2 sectors in general, given their export value, are highly controlled. And so, for our coffee, we work with a partner who is a licensed buyer, which is really great. At one point, we were our licensed coffee buyer. At this point, we've scaled to the point where we have an awesome partner who does that for us. On the cocoa side, we're just now kind of getting into that as we're buying more broadly. And so I would say, while it's not as regulated, or while the structure is different than Ghana, it's still a very challenging operating environment, Cameroon, and given there's several extreme social conflicts happening there right now. One in the further north, one in the northwest region that is affecting all of our sea-based port operations as well.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, just the government itself is less than favorable to work with, and there's a lot of challenges in that environment. Yeah.
You may not have heard that I was in Nigeria in September, and I was in Cross River State in a town called Ecom, which is very, very close to a bridge crossing the river into Cameroon.
We're on just the other side of that bridge doing public health outreach. And
I got pictures of me on the bridge, but they wouldn't allow us more than halfway to the bridge, and they wouldn't allow me to take pictures. I had to have my back and have other people. They said, we'd love to allow you to go across the other side, but it is not safe. And we do, you Americans, we do not want to create an international institute. So, I was within 50 meters in the middle of this river and couldn't cross the river and go into the other side. It's like, whoa.
Yeah,
right.
It's a beautiful part of the world to visit, and it's just amazing. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are kind of nuanced still. And so
kind of nuanced is, I think, a very, very, very.
We try to lead 20 to 40 people to Cameroon every year when times are a little safer anyway. Yeah. And the orientation session for that, I'll just say, is very different than our Central and South America trips or our West or East African trips. But awesome. I want to, on a side call, hear more about your experience in Nigeria, and we can share some stories. So
well, I'm happy to have that conversation. And, we're sitting here in the last couple of minutes. So, fabulous conversation. There are a couple of things that I'd like to talk about and sort of set in the works. First one of which I'd like to have you back in a couple of weeks and have a full-blown tasting, right? Because you and I, the last time I've tasted your chocolate is when we met in person, right? And which was at this chocolate show in New York, like 3 or 4 years ago now.
We've come a long way. I owe you some samples.
So I'd like to do that. And, unfortunately, I don't have the facilities here to actually do a cupping, because I think that would be interesting, right, to do as well. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to sort of throw out there, I don't know when this will happen, but I'd like it to be sort of in a summer timeframe, whether it's this year or next year, to be able to do a retreat which is going to focus on roasting, right? And the only reason why I say summer is that people are not in their workshops in production for holiday season, right? So that people can join us. But to be able to go through a full coffee session, just understand defects and understand what this is all about, and then do the same thing with cocoa, right? To understand what's going on. I think that would be a real fabulous exercise to go through as part of the larger chocolate making process. So I'd like to suggest that. And then I'm working to organize a trip to Tabasco, Mexico, to the largest chocolate festival that nobody's ever heard of, right? The Festival de Chocolate in Tabasco, in Villahermosa, which is the capital, and to do that over the Thanksgiving break, which is when it happens. And so what I'd like to do is coordinate a sort of chocolate life with one of your trips, right? How can we make sure that people who are interested, selfishly, I want to go to these places anyway, but that we can create an environment where people can join us and do that. So I'm just throwing it out there as a bunch of things that we can do over the course of the next little while to have fun and
let's do them both. A lot of ideas. So
let's do all of them. Great. Yep. And I know, the thing which I think is most, I don't know that disappointing is the right word, but maybe disappointing is the right word. You and I started to have this discussion when we're sitting on the stand, right, at this chocolate show. And that's always the worst place to have these discussions. And, you're busy and I'm busy, and then COVID happens, and, all of a sudden, we go very, very different ways. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking forward to continuing these discussions in a lot of different ways, and see how we can engage the community and educate them. I was listening to a podcast earlier this morning. Jack Stein, who is one of the founders of the Chocoa conference in Amsterdam, said, information is one of the only things that you can share with people and not diminish yourself. If I have a chocolate bar and I give half to someone, I only have half a chocolate bar. But if I share information, I can share it as widely, and I still am in possession of all of that information. And if other people share with me, it's just a question of a tide lifting all boats. And I'm looking forward to continuing these kinds of things with you in the future. We've got a little while. Anything that you'd like to, so we said this, people don't ask you about coffee often enough. Why does that surprise you? And what should people to know about coffee?
Well,
why do you
coffee,
think it is that they think about chocolate and they know you do coffee, but they don't talk to you about it?
well, I'll say this. Coffee roasting is a lot more common, period, than like craft chocolate making.
Okay.
And therefore the availability of knowledge was a lot more accessible. And so by having access to that coffee roasting knowledge, while maybe I had to translate it to cocoa, it felt like I had at least a place to go to study and teach myself the craft of roasting. And then of course refine it through trial and error and watching your videos and whoever's willing to share the knowledge, translate that to cocoa roasting. So I just think there's enough now overlap, not in the technical details, but the functional process and ultimately what's happening with the bean from drying, development, and finishing phase. There's a lot to learn from coffee roasting, and I think about how it added a lot of value to our business was relevant as well in this. When people come into our chocolate factory, it's awesome. They get a tour, they taste chocolate. But when we introduced our coffee line, then they could come in just for a coffee. And while they're there, of course, they buy chocolate and they have this experience. But it was like coffee is a daily ritual. It's a habit. Like it's part of our daily culture. Yes. And craft chocolate consumption isn't. Okay, maybe that's most of all we think about. But when you think about the common person, they're always drinking coffee, not necessarily eating chocolate. They do want both. And I felt like coffee was a warm, familiar way to bring them into that chocolate environment as well. So I felt it was very reciprocal as far as supporting each other, supporting both lines of business.
Right. Yeah. Are you familiar with the name Spencer Hyman of Cocoa Runners in the UK?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
big fan.
yes, Spencer. Yeah, a big fan as well. Spencer was a speaker at the Chocolate Maker Forum, which I co-hosted for a number of years at Chocoa. And one of the things that he pointed out that the chocolate world needs to do is it needs to create its ritual. When we think about coffee, there is a ritual. When we think about going and having a glass of wine or a beer after work, there's a ritual associated with those things. Yeah. But for any kind of chocolate, for the most part, if there is a ritual, it's like I have chocolate at dessert sometimes, but there is no moment around which I gather with other people and share. And I think that, how do you go about in creating that ritual moment, right? Whether it's on its own or in combination with something else. I think that that's a task that the specialty chocolate world needs. And while you're here, just to close things out, and I want to be mindful of your time and everybody's time, I like the definition. I like to use the definition of specialty chocolate as opposed to craft chocolate, right? And the way I use specialty chocolate actually comes from the world of specialty coffee. So a specialty cup of coffee is made from any coffee which has received a Q grade above a certain level. That's what a specialty coffee is, right? Easy enough. And so I have a specialty coffee bean, and it doesn't talk about origin. It doesn't talk about genetics. It doesn't talk about anything. It just talks about the potential for this bean to make a good cup of coffee, right? And what I like the idea of adopting that model into the world of cocoa. It's not fine. It's not craft. It's none of those things. It's specialty. And all we're doing is we're saying that this bean, this cocoa bean, has the potential to make a really good bar of chocolate. Your thoughts as we head out of this?
I love that. It would create a unit of measure, at least, instead of just not another buzzword. I think there's definition around all of them, but there's not a whole lot of maybe tangible, measurable qualities around them. And so, specialty coffee is really a simple explanation. I love when people ask me what specialty coffee is. Versus specialty versus fine cocoa or craft chocolate. I kind of start making them up. Well, it has to do with batch sizes. Well, the truth is, I don't know, it could be a bunch of factors. I qualitatively understand it, flavor and sourcing ethics and maybe batch size and integrity of process and ingredients of the final product. But having someone else come in and say, here are the parameters you need to hit to be within this definition would be really helpful. Just like coffee set that stage. So
right, and I think so part of what it is that I like is exactly what you said. I like about the simplicity. So it divorces the notion of specialty from again, origin, genetics, but it also divorces it from all of these other complicated issues around ethics and sustainability and all this other stuff. And we can have those discussions completely separately, right?
Yeah.
So I could be using a special, I mean, I could be Kicking Horse Coffee up in, Windermere in British Columbia. I think that's where it is. And, they've got, massive roasters, and they're just like running, tons a day through their facility. It's still specialty coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it has nothing to do with whether I'm doing it in a 1 kilo roaster or a 500 kilo roaster. It's none of those things. And I think that there's value in taking a look at the work, for example, that the Cocoa of Excellence program is doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? That they're saying what's important here is the ability of these beans to make a flavorful chocolate product. Right. And we don't care where this bean comes from. We don't care about the origins. Now, we can have all these other discussions about ethics and sustainability and stuff like that completely separately.
Mm-hmm.
But totally, I love the fact that, I'm able to get some, I'm looking to figure out how do I get more support for being able to talk about it this way. And if I can, it occurs to me, I got this all set up. Tell us about this image. As we head out, what's going on here? Where are we?
That's a good old-fashioned cut test. So, yeah, that is me with George, and in Cameroon at our home. It's actually not even on our farm. It's where we stay in our front yard doing a bean evaluation. Mm-hmm. I remember that batch, actually.
So is this the pad that you're drying beans on, or what you've done is you've taken a couple of bags of beans, spread them out here, you sort of randomly selected beans from them, and you've opened them up?
Correct. They're already dry. They're fermented and dried. This was from a partnering neighboring farm, and we were just brought them home and spread out. I try to do as random as I can as far as scoops from each bag.
Humans are really bad at random.
What's that?
Humans are really bad at random.
Oh my gosh, the worst.
So I have a quick question. Are you slicing the beans individually? You got a knife and you're cutting the beans one at a time?
Yeah, the pocket knife. I try to slice open, 100 beans, right? And then if there's, you just count, and if 10 are looking under fermented, then 10% of that 100 bean sample is inadequate. Yep.
Yeah, we can have a deep dive into cut tests and what cut tests were designed for and what they're good for and what they're not. But that's a separate topic. And what I want to do is I want to say thank you to my special guest today, Jeff Abella of Moka Origins, for joining us, for being so generous with his time and his knowledge, and looking forward to having you back as a guest, looking to do this tasting sooner rather than later. And then working together to do some in-person trips, not just to the Poconos, but perhaps to some interesting producing country somewhere else in the future. And with Jeff, again, thank you very much. Thanks all of you for joining me, whether you've joined me live, you're going to be watching us in the future. Please consider going over to, if you're watching on YouTube, liking this video, giving a comment, perhaps subscribing to the Chocolate Wire channel where all these things are posted, going over the Chocolate Live, becoming a member if you like what it is that I'm doing, support what we're doing. And Jeff, you've got a website, and people can go to mokaorigins.com. There'll be a link in the post for today, and they can order your chocolate and your coffee online. And with that, everybody, please remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Cheers. Thanks, Jeff.